Imagine, for a moment, the thundering beat of drums, the crisp air filled with determination, and the ground trembling under the weight of over 500,000 boots marching in unison. The most formidable army the world had ever seen, spearheaded by none other than Napoleon Bonaparte, the emperor who had tamed Europe, now set his sights on Russia. But as history would have it, Mother Russia had a few icy tricks up her sleeve. Hold on to your winter coats, for this is a tale of ambition, frostbite, and the steep price of overreaching. Why did Napoleon, a military genius, make this fatal gamble? Let's march into the heart of this chilling tale. In the pivotal year of 1812, Europe resembled a grand chessboard, meticulously set with kings, queens, and pawns, all seemingly under the control of one master player, Napoleon Bonaparte. Stretching from the Iberian Peninsula to the heartlands of Central Europe, his colossal empire was a testament to his military prowess and political acumen. Cities had fallen, kingdoms had bowed, and monarchs had been reshaped under his strategic manipulations. Yet, amidst this vast landscape of domination, there was one region, cold and vast, that remained stubbornly defiant: Russia. It was not just any challenge, it was one posed by the formidable Tsar Alexander. The Tsar, perhaps seeing himself as another player on this European chessboard, was not one to be subdued easily. He audaciously flouted Napoleon's Continental System, an ambitious blockade designed to cripple Britain economically by preventing European nations from trading with it. With every act of defiance, every ship that docked contravening Napoleon's diktats, it was as if Tsar Alexander was knocking the chess pieces off Napoleon's board, challenging the emperor's very aura of invincibility. These were not mere political maneuvers. Each defiant act was a personal affront to Napoleon's towering ego, an ego built on a series of unparalleled victories. The very fabric of the Continental System, his grand strategy to establish dominance over all of Europe, was being torn apart by this distant, frosty realm. Such audacity posed a question: how should an emperor, known for his unquenchable thirst for control, respond? For Napoleon, who had tamed much of Europe with a blend of military might and tactical genius, the answer seemed straightforward. He believed it was time to bring this defiant Russian bear to heel. Russia needed to be taught a lesson, one that would echo through the annals of history. The man who had subjugated the Spanish, tamed the Austrians, and humbled the Prussians, surely believed that he could bend the will of the Russian Tsar and his people. Such was the audacity of his self-belief that it eclipsed any warnings or premonitions. With meticulous care and military brilliance, he assembled the Grande Armée. It was not just any army, it was a monument to his ambition, a behemoth force that included soldiers from various parts of his sprawling empire. Frenchmen, Poles, Germans, and many others, united under the tricolor and were driven by the Napoleonic ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity. This was an army designed to awe and intimidate, a living, breathing manifestation of his imperial might. Yet, Napoleon had calculated without considering two extraordinary variables, as intangible as they were lethal: the boundless Russian landscapes and the punishing chill of its winters. Russia was not like the compact battlefields of Austerlitz or the warm climates of Spain. It was an immense tapestry of forests, steppes, and rivers, stretching further than even the most experienced general could fathom. Each mile was a test of logistics and human endurance, a devouring void where traditional tactics lost their potency. And then there was the Russian winter, a force of nature that knew no king or emperor, that bowed to no army however grand. It was as if the very air turned against you, the winds howling like feral beasts, and the snow piling up as if to block your path deliberately. It was a season that could sap the life out of the most hardened soldier, freeze the blood in the veins of the galloping cavalry, and turn cannons into useless chunks of metal. Little did Napoleon know that these two elements would not be mere footnotes in his grand Russian odyssey. They would become central characters in the drama, actors who refused to stick to the script he had written. Napoleon, the master puppeteer who thought men and elements would dance to his tune, was about to face an adversary that defied his military textbooks. And so, with the invincible Grande Armée at his heels and a heart full of dreams of another magnificent conquest, he stepped into Russia. But what awaited him were not just men in arms. Lying in ambush were the impassable expanses of land too wild to tame and winter too brutal to endure, waiting to teach the master of Europe that there are forces in this world that simply will not be played with. As the colossal wheels of the Grande Armée began to turn, trampling over the Russian border, it seemed as though destiny itself was bowing to Napoleon's indomitable will. The early phases of the campaign went almost like clockwork. Villages and towns fell, and the Russian forces appeared to be in a perpetual state of retreat. At face value, it looked like another glorious chapter in the saga of Napoleon's unparalleled military mastery. But there was more than met the eye. The retreating Russians employed a strategy as ancient as their land, the scorched earth policy. Fields were set ablaze, livestock slaughtered, and settlements torched. As the Grande Armée advanced, they found themselves walking through a nightmarish tableau of desolation and ashes. It was a psychological warfare of the highest order, not just a tactic but a message carved in fire and smoke. Come, the burning earth seemed to say, step into the hollowed core of Mother Russia, but know that you will find no sustenance here. The message was a taunt, a gauntlet thrown at Napoleon's feet, challenging not just his military prowess but his understanding of war itself. Yet Napoleon, that juggernaut of ambition and tactical genius, was not to be easily balked. In his mind's eye, the prize glittered ever so tantalizingly: Moscow, the storied capital, with its golden domes and intricate palaces. He imagined marching through its gates, the Russian aristocracy bowing before him, and the weight of his victory forcing Tsar Alexander into submission. Moscow wasn't just a city; in his grand imagination, it was the linchpin that would bring the entire Russian realm to its knees. But between Napoleon and his prize lay the grim specter of Borodino, a battle so savage that it could only be described as an apocalyptic dance of death and destruction. This was not the elegant choreography of tactical maneuvers that Napoleon was accustomed to; this was carnage, raw, and relentless. Cannons roared like the bellows of hell, tearing through flesh and bone. Soldiers on both sides fell in droves, their lifeblood soaking the Russian soil. When the smoke cleared, Napoleon claimed the field, but at a staggering cost. The battle had decimated his ranks, drained his supplies, and, most importantly, exposed the vulnerability of his once invincible army. What was left of the Grande Armée resembled less a triumphant force of conquerors and more a beleaguered band of survivors. Faces that had been flush with enthusiasm were now lined with fatigue, limbs that had marched with vigor were now staggering with exhaustion. They had breached the gates of hell and returned, but the experience had changed them, weakened them, and raised questions about the infallibility of their emperor. For the first time, the man who had swaggered across Europe, distributing kingdoms to his siblings and forcing emperors to abdicate, seemed to stagger. The Battle of Borodino was a Pyrrhic victory that cast a long shadow, not just over his campaign, but over his entire aura of invincibility. It was a grim prelude to the darker days that awaited him, days where he would confront not just the Russian army, but also the very elements and the chilling realization that even he, the master of war, could underestimate the cost of ambition. Upon entering Moscow, that symbol of Russian majesty and resilience, Napoleon must have felt a surge of triumph, a glorious crescendo to his military symphony. In his mind, this was it, the culmination of his Russian odyssey, the moment when he would finally bend this obstinate land and its people to his will. But what he encountered was nothing short of a surreal spectacle. Moscow was a ghost town. Where he had expected throngs of subdued citizens and officials waiting to hand him the keys to the city, he found eerie silence. The avenues and squares, which should have been bustling with life, were desolate. It was as if the entire city had risen up and walked away, leaving behind an empty husk, a phantom capital. There were no surrender ceremonies, no Russian noblemen to receive his terms, not even the presence of desperate civilians. Moscow was empty, a vacated stage where he could celebrate no real victory. And then, as if directed by some malevolent force intent on mocking his imperial aspirations, the unthinkable happened. Moscow ignited. Fiery tongues of flame leapt up from various quarters, consuming palaces, churches, and homes. Within hours, the once proud city was an inferno, its grandeur swallowed by fire, turning into an enormous pyre. The Russians had done the unimaginable. They set their beloved city ablaze rather than let it fall intact into Napoleon's hands. Imagine the psychological toll on Napoleon and his men. They had marched thousands of miles, fought countless battles, and dreamt of this moment, the glorious capture of Moscow, as their ultimate prize. Instead, they found themselves standing in a landscape of ruin, surrounded by nothing but cinders and smoke. The mental image is staggering, a once unstoppable army, their faces now ashen, not from battle but from sheer disillusionment. But the cruelest blow was yet to come. As they stood amidst the smoldering ruins of Moscow, the first snowflakes of the season began to drift down from the sky. Those delicate, icy crystals might as well have been the harbingers of doom. Each flake that settled on a French coat or cap seemed to whisper a dreadful truth. They were trapped. Trapped in a land that was hostile not merely because of its people or its armies, but because of its very essence. The Russian winter, that legendary and merciless adversary, was setting in. If the fire had decimated their spirits, the snow pierced through whatever vestiges of hope remained. Now, they weren't just fighting the Russians, they were fighting the land, the elements, and a winter that could freeze the soul. It was a chilling realization, one that transformed their mission from a quest for conquest to a struggle for survival. Napoleon's Grande Armée, once the terror of Europe, found themselves humbled, not by an enemy general or a superior force, but by fire, snow, and their own hubris. They had come seeking the capitulation of a country, but ended up imprisoned by its climate and its indomitable will. It was a tragic epiphany, one that signaled not just the failure of a campaign, but the crumbling of an empire built on the sands of overreach and arrogance. The retreat from Moscow was not merely a tactical withdrawal, it was a harrowing odyssey through the icy bowels of hell itself. What had commenced as a grand military expedition now degenerated into a nightmarish scramble for survival. The biting Siberian winds whipped through the ragged uniforms of the French soldiers, each gust a lash against their already broken spirits. Gone were the days of triumphant marches and disciplined formations. This was a bedraggled stream of humanity trudging through a bleak and unyielding landscape. Adding to their misery were the incessant hit-and-run attacks by Russian Cossacks and guerrillas, like vultures circling a dying animal. These men seemed to materialize out of the icy mists, striking quickly and melting away into the wilderness. Each ambush was not merely a physical assault, but a hammer blow to the dwindling morale of Napoleon's men. Hunger, that gnawing, relentless companion, clawed at their insides. Desperate tales emerged, stories of soldiers so famished they fell upon the corpses of their horses, turning their faithful steeds into grotesque feasts. Some even speak of men who, overcome by fatigue, lay down in the snow for just a moment's rest, their eyes closing for what they thought would be mere minutes but turned out to be an eternal sleep. They would never wake up, their bodies becoming icy monuments to the devastating toll of the campaign. But if there was a singular moment that encapsulated the agony and despair of this doomed retreat, it was the crossing of the Berezina River. This was no ordinary river, it was a torrential, unforgiving barrier of icy water and lethal currents. Its crossing claimed scores of lives, as men and horses were swept away or succumbed to hypothermia. And for those who did manage to cross, what awaited them on the other side was not the promise of safety, but further cruelty, more Russian troops, more ambushes, and the relentless, tightening noose of the Russian winter. By the time the tattered remnants of the Grande Armée staggered back over the Niemen River, the same boundary they had so confidently crossed months earlier, they were unrecognizable. From an awe-inspiring juggernaut of over 500,000 men, a mere 20,000 to 30,000 shattered souls returned. These were not conquerors, not the heroes of Austerlitz or Jena, these were survivors, men whose lives would forever be marked by the indelible scars of their Russian ordeal. Napoleon's ambitious tapestry of conquest had unraveled, thread by agonizing thread, consumed by the vast Russian landscape and its implacable winter. An empire that had seemed invincible was exposed as a house of cards, and an emperor who had appeared to be a master of his destiny became a tragic figure, undone by the hubris of believing he could conquer nature and bend the will of an indomitable people. So, There you have it, the tale of Napoleon's catastrophic Russian campaign, a monumental saga of ambition, hubris, and crushing defeat. So, why share this tale? Because it's a reminder. A reminder of the price of overreach, of the dangers of underestimating both your enemy and nature, and of the thin line between ambition and hubris. Napoleon's fatal gamble is a lesson for all, a lesson written in snow, blood, and tears. If this story of frost, fire, and fate sent chills down your spine, or if you felt the flames of Moscow or the biting cold of the Russian winter, then, my fellow history enthusiast, you're in the right place. Dive deep into the annals of history with us. Hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling tales from the past. After all, history isn't just about dates and events, it's about stories, emotions, and lessons that resonate even today. Until next time, keep the wheels of time turning.